the outcast among stars. The engineer nobody wanted. Dr. James Chen pressed his forehead against the cold window of the Galactic Engineering Council headquarters, watching the sleek starships come and go. Each vessel represented perfection, flawless designs created by the galaxy's most brilliant minds. And here he stood, the human who had destroyed the most expensive prototype in Council history. 3 months ago, James had been celebrated. Fresh from Earth with revolutionary ideas about engine design, he'd been recruited to work on the Infinity Drive project. The Council believed humans might offer a unique perspective. They were wrong, or so everyone now believed. The day everything fell apart. The memory still burned in James's mind like hot metal. He could see the simulation room, filled with the galaxy's top engineers. The Zenthari had skin like polished obsidian and minds that calculated faster than computers. The Valorum possessed 4 arms and could design engines while barely thinking. And the Archonic delegation, beings of pure energy who understood physics in ways organic creatures never could. James had been presenting his modifications to the Infinity Drive. Simple changes, he'd called them. Ways to make the engine more efficient by introducing controlled chaos into the energy flow. The other engineers had listened politely at first, their translators humming softly. Controlled chaos? Senior Engineer Vexlar of the Zenthari had asked, his crystalline eyes narrowing. That concept violates the fundamental principles of stable engine design. Human thinking is too primitive, Engineer Solisna from Valorum had added, her 4 hands making dismissive gestures. They build machines like children stacking blocks, hoping they don't fall. But James had been confident. He'd run the numbers 1,000 times. So when they authorized a small-scale test, he'd activated his modified drive with steady hands and a hopeful heart. The catastrophic failure. The explosion hadn't been nuclear. It hadn't even been large by galactic standards. But the prototype engine had cost 17 billion credits and represented 5 years of collaborative work from a dozen species. And James's controlled chaos had turned it into molten scrap in 3.7 seconds. The silence afterward had been worse than any explosion. The council members had stared at the smoking remains, then at James, then back at the wreckage. No one had shouted. No one had blamed him directly. They'd simply, quietly, removed him from the project. Perhaps human engineering isn't quite ready for galactic standards, Vexlar had said with something almost like pity in his voice. We appreciate your enthusiasm. Now James worked in the archives, filing old engine schematics and trying not to think about what he'd lost. The other humans at the council avoided him. Even his own species considered him an embarrassment, proof that humans didn't belong among the galaxy's elite engineers. The message that changed everything. The alarm started on a Tuesday morning, station time. James was cataloging a batch of 200-year-old thruster designs when every screen in the building turned red. Critical alert, void breach detected. Sector 9. All senior engineers report immediately. James felt his stomach drop. A void breach meant only one thing, something had torn through the fabric of space itself. They were rare, catastrophic, and absolutely deadly. The last recorded breach had consumed an entire solar system before the ancients sealed it shut. He ran toward the main engineering bay, his clearance badge somehow still granting him access. The room was chaos. Holographic displays showed a growing tear in space, located near the Centauri colonies. 50 billion lives in immediate danger. Senior Engineer Vexlar stood at the center console, his usually calm face tight with stress. We need to generate a containment field, but the power requirements are impossible. Every stable engine design we have falls short by 40%. What about the Infinity Drive? Someone asked. Destroyed, remember? Another voice answered, followed by uncomfortable silence. James pushed forward before he could stop himself. I have the backup files. My modified design. Every head turned toward him. The room fell silent except for the soft beeping of warning alarms. The design that exploded? Vexlar asked slowly. It didn't explode because it failed, James said, his voice shaking but determined. It exploded because it generated too much power. 47% more than calculated. The impossible choice. The room erupted in argument. The Valorum engineers insisted it was too dangerous. The Archonic beings calculated failure probabilities that made everyone's blood run cold. But as they argued, the breach grew larger on the screens. 20 billion lives. 30 billion. 40 billion. Dexlar held up one crystalline hand for silence. Do we have another option? No one spoke. Then we build it, the Zenthari said quietly. All of us. Together. And Dr. Chen will lead the project. The next 72 hours blurred together. James worked without sleeping, his human stubbornness refusing to let his body quit. But he wasn't alone. Dexlar used his computational mind to perfect the calculations. So Lisna's 4 arms assembled components at impossible speeds. The Archonic beings stabilized the energy matrices with their unique understanding of physics. They built the engine in 3 days, a feat that should have taken 3 months. It was ugly, asymmetrical, held together with parts from a dozen different systems. It looked exactly like what the Valorum engineer had once mocked, blocks stacked by a child. But it was beautiful to James. The test nobody wanted. Power levels at 110%, someone called out as they activated the containment field. 130%. 150%. The engine began to shake. James watched the readings, his heart hammering. Too much chaos and it would explode again. Too little and the breach would consume everything. It's working, Dexlar whispered, and James heard something like wonder in his voice. The containment field expanded, wrapping around the breach like invisible hands pulling a wound closed. The power output hit 160%, more than any stable engine should generate. The chaos James had introduced was creating energy patterns that shouldn't exist, pulling power from quantum fluctuations that conventional engines couldn't access. Breach containment at 50%, the displays showed. 70%. 90%. And then, impossibly, the breach sealed shut. The tear in space closed as if it had never existed. 50 billion lives saved by an engine that everyone had said was too dangerous to exist. The engineering bay erupted in cheers, beings from a dozen species celebrating together. But James just sank into his chair, shaking with exhaustion and relief. Dexlar approached, his crystalline face unreadable. Then, slowly, he placed a hand on James's shoulder, the Zenthari gesture of highest respect. We called your design chaos, he said quietly. But perhaps we were wrong. Perhaps what we called chaos was simply complexity we didn't yet understand. The universe itself runs on controlled chaos, after all. Maybe humans understand that better than the rest of us. The new path forward. Recognition and revelation. The weeks following the breach closure transformed James's life in ways he never imagined. The Galactic Engineering Council held an emergency session, broadcasting across all member worlds. James stood before them, no longer the embarrassment but the engineer who had saved 50 billion lives with the design everyone had mocked. We owe Dr. Chen and his team an apology, the council speaker announced, their translated voice resonating through the chamber. We dismissed human engineering as primitive. We failed to see that different perspectives aren't weaknesses, they're strengths we haven't learned to utilize. But the real change came in the engineering departments themselves. Young engineers from across the galaxy began requesting transfers to work with the human teams. They wanted to learn this controlled chaos approach, to understand how thinking differently could lead to breakthrough solutions. The question that haunted him. Despite the recognition, James couldn't sleep. He kept running the simulations, checking his numbers again and again. The engine had worked, yes, but he needed to understand why his original prototype had failed while this one succeeded. It was 3 a.m. station time when he finally saw it. The difference wasn't in the design itself, it was in how it had been built. The original prototype had been constructed with perfect precision by automated systems, every component exactly where it should be. But the emergency engine had been assembled by multiple species, each adding their own techniques and small variations. Those imperfections, those tiny deviations from perfect specifications, had actually stabilized the chaotic energy flows. The universe, James realized, didn't want perfection. It wanted diversity, variation, the beautiful mess of different approaches working together. Teaching the unteachable. You want me to teach a class on imperfect engineering? James asked, staring at the formal request on his screen. Vexlar nodded, his crystalline features reflecting the office lights. We've spent centuries perfecting our designs, eliminating every variable. But your approach embraces variables, uses them as features rather than bugs. Our students need to learn this. The first class was awkward. James stood before 40 students from 15 different species, many of whom had engineering knowledge that made his credentials look like kindergarten art. How did you teach beings who could calculate faster than computers to embrace uncertainty? Forget everything you know about perfect designs, James began, and watched their confusion grow. The universe runs on chaos. Stars explode. Galaxies collide. Life itself is an accident of chemistry that shouldn't work but does. We keep trying to impose order on a universe that thrives on creative disorder. A young Valorum student raised one of her 4 hands. But chaos leads to failure. We've seen the statistics. Controlled chaos, James corrected. Like a river. The water flows chaotically, but the riverbed guides it toward the ocean. We don't eliminate the chaos, we give it direction. The new projects begin. Word of the program spread quickly. Within 6 months, James's adaptive engineering lab became the most requested assignment at the council. They tackled problems that conventional engineering had declared unsolvable. There was the Corvin food crisis, where 300 worlds couldn't grow enough crops. Traditional solutions focused on perfect growing conditions, perfect nutrients, perfect everything. James's team introduced controlled variations in temperature, light, and soil composition. The crops thrived, adapting and growing stronger through mild stress rather than perfect comfort. Then came the communication relay problem. The archonic beings needed to transmit data across dark matter barriers, but every stable design failed. James's approach used intentionally unstable quantum states, letting the signal chaos hop through multiple probability states. It worked brilliantly, and the archonic scientists admitted they'd been thinking about the problem wrong for centuries. The resistance grows. But not everyone celebrated these successes. A faction of traditional engineers formed, calling themselves the Preservation Society. They argued that James's methods were dangerous, that abandoning proven principles would lead to catastrophe. Their leader was engineer Taurix, an elderly Zenthari who had designed stable engines for 400 years. One success doesn't prove a theory, he announced at a public debate. Chaos engineering is reckless gambling with lives and resources. Dr. Chin got lucky once. That's all. James couldn't deny the fear was valid. His methods did involve more risk, more uncertainty. But the universe itself was uncertain, and pretending otherwise was its own kind of danger. You're right that I got lucky, James said during the debate, his words surprising everyone. But I got lucky because I tried something different. How many unsolved problems do we have because we keep applying the same solutions that have already failed? Sometimes you need to break the rules to find out why they existed in the first place. The ultimate test. The challenge came from an unexpected source. The Void Watchers, an ancient organization that monitored spacetime stability, detected something impossible, multiple breach signatures appearing simultaneously across the galaxy. Not random tears, but coordinated ones, as if something was intentionally trying to rip holes in reality. We need a solution in 2 weeks, the head watcher announced. After that, the breaches will cascade and nothing can stop them. Every engineering team in the galaxy began working, but the traditional approaches went nowhere. Perfect containment fields required perfect power sources, and generating that much stable power was mathematically impossible. James gathered his diverse team, Vexlar with his computational brilliance, Solisna with her multitasking assembly skills, 3 human engineers who understood intuitive problem-solving, an archonic theorist who thought in quantum probabilities, and even young students who hadn't yet learned what was impossible. "We can't contain the breaches individually," James said, holographic displays surrounding them. "But what if we connect them? Create a network where the chaos of one breach stabilizes another?" "That would require the breaches to interact in perfectly controlled chaos," Vexlar said slowly. "The computational power alone." "We don't compute it," one of the human engineers interrupted. "We let it compute itself. Organic systems self-organize. Maybe spacetime can too." The network of chaos. They built the framework in 10 days. Not a single massive device, but hundreds of small generators spread across the galaxy, each one introducing controlled chaos into the local spacetime fabric. The breaches would interact, their energies flowing through the network, ultimately canceling each other out through constructive interference patterns too complex to calculate but simple enough to let happen naturally. "This is insane," Tauric said when he saw the design. "You're not solving the problem, you're making it worse and hoping it somehow fixes itself." "Yes," James agreed simply. "Sometimes that's exactly what the universe needs." When they activated the network, every sensor in the galaxy went haywire. Energy readings spiked to levels that should have torn ships apart. Space itself seemed to ripple like water disturbed by a stone. And then, gradually, the chaos began to organize itself. The breaches didn't close, they transformed, becoming stable wormholes that connected distant parts of the galaxy. Transportation that should have taken years now took hours. The crisis became an opportunity, all because they'd stopped fighting the chaos and learned to dance with it. The legacy. 5 years later, James stood before a new generation of engineers at the council headquarters. His adaptive engineering program had become standard curriculum, taught alongside traditional methods. The galaxy had learned that there wasn't one right way to solve problems, there were infinite approaches, and the best solution often came from combining different perspectives. "They called me the broken engineer," James told his students, "because I didn't fit their definition of perfect. But the universe doesn't want perfect. It wants functional, adaptive, creative. It wants engineers who understand that sometimes the best designs are the ones that shouldn't work but do anyway." A young human student raised their hand. "Professor Chen, do you ever regret the original explosion? The prototype you destroyed?" James smiled. "Every day. But not because it failed, because it taught me the most important lesson in engineering. Failure isn't the opposite of success. It's the first step toward understanding. The prototype exploded because I tried something new. And that explosion eventually saved 50 billion lives." He looked out at the diverse faces before him, crystalline Zenthari, multi-armed Valorum, energy-based Archonics, and humans with their stubborn creativity. Each species brought something unique to engineering, and it was that diversity, that controlled chaos of perspectives, that made them stronger together than any could be alone. The galaxy once thought human engineering was too primitive, James concluded. Too chaotic, too unpredictable, too willing to break the rules. They were right about all of that. And that's exactly why it works. Because the universe itself is chaotic, unpredictable, and constantly breaking its own rules. We're not trying to fight against that anymore. We're learning to engineer with it. The class erupted in discussion, different species debating and sharing ideas, their unique perspectives creating something greater than any single viewpoint. James watched them with satisfaction, knowing that the future of galactic engineering wasn't about perfection, it was about embracing the beautiful, functional chaos that made the universe work. And somewhere in the archives, his original engine design sat preserved, not as a failure, but as the beginning of a revolution. The day one human's mistake had taught the galaxy that sometimes the broken things are exactly what we need to build something better.